At 14 years, father, hopelessly old-fashioned. At 21, Joey's not there yet, but he's rapidly approaching. He says, oh, that man is out of date. What do you expect? At 25 years old, he knows a bit about a little bit. At 30 years old, he must find out what Dad thinks about this. At 35 years old, a little patience. Let's get Dad's meaning first. You guys are all past that, aren't you? Well, here's one for Rob. Though 50 years old, at 50 years old, what would Dad have thought about that? At 60 years old, my dad knew literally everything, and at 65, I wish I could talk with my dad once more. That's my age, 65. Like the Father God, a good father wants the best for his children. And everything they do, everywhere they're at, and everything they're involved with. A good father like King David wants them safe. He doesn't quit loving them because they're disobedient, because something's going on and they've lost track. Absalom's life, when it went awry, he had killed his brother because his brother had molested his sister. Now, back then they weren't full brothers, they weren't full sisters, they were halves. They were like that.
Well, Absalom and Amnon were half.
Yeah.
You mentioned about a good father loves their children, but when I was going back through this again, because I came at it a whole different way this time.
All right, good.
Was is the young man safe? Is it, as a father, I love my kids ferociously. I really do. And, I never really would have thought that I could love another human being as much as I love my kids. But what I've learned in my years now as a father is that a lot of times loving your kids is not enough. It needs more than that. And I know David really loved Absalom, but David made a lot of mistakes as a father. A lot of mistakes. And those mistakes built Absalom. All of his mistakes created the man that Absalom would become. And the first was with Timrah. Is it Timrah? I think it's
Timrah, yeah.
Timrah with his sister. And David's oldest son, Amnon, was, if you read the account, it's really rough. This is good. In 2 Samuel 13, I just want you to show, this is the beginning of the story of the fall of Absalom. This is where it starts. 2 Samuel 13 verse 1 says, after this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar. I was completely wrong. and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Amnon was so distressed over his sister Tamar that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it was improper for Amnon to do anything with her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab. We're going on down. And Amnon begged the king, just to kind of wrap it up so we don't forsake of time, Amnon begged the king to make Tamar serve him because he pretended to be sick. And then once he had him alone in his house, he creepy-guyed her into, why don't you feed me my lunch in the bedroom? Creepy guy typed it. He creepy-guyed it. And then did the unspeakable. And after that, Absalom waited 2 years for justice to be done, because then after Amnon did what he did, he cast her out and embarrassed her, humiliated her, and discarded her to where she was, at that point in those times, under that tradition, unmarriable almost. And he completely despised her and treated her terribly in front of everybody. And so for 2 years, Absalom waited for justice for his sister, because she was full sister to him. But Amnon was a half-brother. And so he waited 2 years for there to be any kind of justice or retribution for what had happened to Tamar. And nothing happened at all. And then he took it upon himself to make sure that justice was done. And David had 2 years to step in and make it right, and he didn't. And so when he didn't, Absalom took it upon himself to make sure that justice was done. David did not want to take on the responsibility of punishing his firstborn son. And so that led to the very first rift between Absalom and David. Because Absalom loved David, but we see no indication. David loved Absalom, But the word doesn't ever tell us that Absalom loved him back. And I used to think that that was just a character flaw on Absalom's part. But he was actually, the seeds were planted for this breakdown at the very beginning of our story with him.
Well, and the thing about, as a parent, as a father, your children respond to your words when they're young, okay? Like Dante and Zeke, when Rob snaps, they come to attention, okay? I'm sure Keegan and Kipton are the same way. We just pick on the sons, but that was my sons. When they were little, they responded accordingly. Rob has moments in his life where he didn't think he was going to live through them, you know. I like to tell that story about your life. I love that one day. Some of them may have known.
Only because it's Father's Day.
Yeah, okay.
I was about 16 years old. I was at the height of my intelligence. I never knew more in my life, before or since, than I did when I was 16 years old. And he said something that didn't align with my worldview at the time. And I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel like I had been, that my opinions were justified or supported. And I said something that I probably shouldn't have. I don't remember what exactly I said.
I don't remember.
But it was probably something along the lines of, you don't know what you're talking about, or along those lines. And I remember the way our house used to be set up in Washington was we had a big living room. And at one point it was separated off kind of with a couch that was kind of long, split it. So there was a spot behind the couch, and you had a living room area in front of the couch. And I was standing behind the couch, and everything got quiet.
And I was at the door.
Yeah, you were in front. It was probably from me to Grandma.
Yeah.
The distance. And all of a sudden you just got quiet, and you said, well, if you feel like a man, why don't you step around from behind that couch? I didn't feel like a man anymore. And I got real nervous. I'm like, well, that was the line. I found it. The point of no return. I figured it out. There was only one other time in my life I've been that scared of another human being, and that was when I went to basic training, and the drill sergeants showed up in the blue buses with the tinted windows, and I realized that it was actually for real now. They stepped off the bus with those mirrored glasses and the brown rounds. I'm like, uh-oh, now I've done it. That's the same feeling I had standing behind that couch. I'm like, this is the end. I don't even like the Doors, and that song was playing in the back of my head. This is the end. So
I remember that same story, but I love it when you tell it, because what was going on in my head was, I hope he doesn't step around that couch, because he was built well, he's strong, and he was younger than me. And I figure if I bit off more than I can chew at this point in life, But you want them responding to your words, etc. I can remember picking on my dad. He's not here to defend himself. I was on my way to Vietnam, home on leave. Back then I smoked, and I was standing. A friend of mine had stopped by our apartment that Deb and I were in for 45 days, being newlyweds for 45 days before I went off to war to die. And I stepped out, and I had a cigarette in my hand. I'm standing out in front of my house, my apartment, outside, talking to my friend. My dad pulls up, and my friend leaves. My dad comes up, and he's standing there, and he looks down at my hand, and he looks up at me and says, "What's that in your hand, boy?" I was 21 years old, and I felt like I was 12. I thought I had crossed the line of no return. The thing is that you want your children responding to your words all of their lives. You want them to hear your words, because see what happened to Absalom also, he got people speaking to him, tweaking what he thought was right. If you read this story, and you need to go back to about chapter 12, read it on all up through 18 or 19.
I have a note on that too, about the fact that, keep going, I'll jump in on that when you're done.
He kept listening to the wrong words later. Your children, no matter how they respond to you today, you want them hearing your words when they're older. You want them hearing your words of encouragement, of hope, of faith, of dreams. You want them hearing your words all of their life. You want those words to drown out all the obstacles that are going to come their way. Go ahead.
And then it was, like I said, it was 2 years before Absalom had any kind of resolution towards his sister. And then he was banished for 3 years after that. For 3 years, he's sent away to live in the household of his mother, where they were from. And so for 3 years, and then all of a sudden David starts falling apart because he missed Absalom. He really loved Absalom. And Absalom had been gone for 3 years, so he sent for Absalom to come back, but he said, well, you're not allowed to see me. So he brought him back to Jerusalem, but wouldn't let Absalom back in to see him. This is not good parenting. I don't care if you're a king or not. Whatever your title, your position is, your priority is your family. And so he was not being a good father, and that he did address the situation still, and then brought him back to Jerusalem, but wouldn't see him. Now imagine you as a person being brought back by a parent, and you're not allowed to, your parent refuses to see you. I can't imagine what kind of feeling that would be, to be refused to even be seen. Not only did you feel like you had to step in where that parent was deficient and fix something that they should have done, but then also once you do it, you're banished, you're punished for doing what he should have done, and then he won't even see you when he brings you back. And I think that period lasted for a little while too, before David finally allowed Absalom to see him. Then at this point, is what Dad was talking about, was that Absalom started having other people whisper in his ears, and Absalom started doing something again that David should have stepped in on. For 40 years, Absalom sat at the gates of the city and started undercutting David's authority. If you go to 2 Samuel 15, look at verse 7. Oh, I'm sorry, back it up. I guess we got to go all the way. We have to go all the way back to the beginning. All right, here in 15 verse 1. We'll run through it real quick just so you can see what I'm talking about. After this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Now Absalom would rise early and stand before the way to the gate. So it was whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Your servant is from such and such, the tribe of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, then I would give him justice." Remember, Absalom's already seen that David will not inflict justice, that he has to be the one to bring justice. This is a theme that he carries through with him throughout this whole story. And so it was, whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I have made to the Lord." Absalom is now getting ready to set up a new kingdom. And he did it because for 40 years, David did not rein in or make amends for what had happened. 40 years. Absalom stood, it wasn't like he went out there for a week, and the people of Israel loved David. They've been singing David's praises since he was a kid. They saw him kill Goliath. They saw him win the favor of Saul. They saw Saul try to kill him time and time again. David wouldn't return the violence. They sang songs about him. Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. They loved David. It took Absalom 40 years to steal their love. And he did it with the king watching him.
You know, David was not the ideal parent, as he's saying. But all of us as parents make mistakes. And a lot of times we have a chance at some point in time to fix those mistakes. Now, several years back, I remember you were still single at the time when I wrote those letters to you. And Jaden was like 1. I even wrote it to my 3 oldest granddaughters. I wrote it at Christmas. God spoke to me and said, "I want you to write your letter to your children. I want you to express where you feel like you failed as a parent." Now, that can set up a lot of problems, but what it should set up is an honesty between you and your adult children that says, "These are the mistakes I made. I hope you don't make those." And I wrote those letters in such a fashion that I reprimanded myself, or I asked for forgiveness of them. But what is interesting, when I became honest with them, and now David was never honest with Absalom. He never, like Rob said, he never ever came back and did what he needed to do. Now at the end here, he's crying, "Is the young man safe?" He wanted him back. But the thing was, is he never did anything prior to that to see it be done. And so his captains, like a lot of people, they'll line up. I tell people all the time in counseling, look, if you're in a marriage dispute or you're having a problem, don't go to your parents. Don't go to your parents, because your parents are going to line up with you, and you fix it with your husband, you fix it with your wife. Your parents may not be fixed with them. They may not come on board right away, and you got a problem then, you know. I remember when Deb and I had a problem early in our marriage. 6 years into it. We had not lived together the first 4 years, but about a year and a half. And I left, and I said I wanted a divorce. And during the middle of the week, I was gone for a whole week. It was a long time. But for the middle of the week, I decided to take my laundry over to Mom's, and I walked to the laundry desk and said, "What are you doing? Your mom's not doing your laundry. You're the one left." My dad talked to me about, and what's funny is Debbie thought she'd go to her dad, and he'd defend her. And he said to her, "What did you do to make him feel like this?" See, we got the opposite ends of it that a lot of people don't get. But see, when you take a quarrel to somebody else outside who you're doing, you're going to get them to line up with you. That's what David did. That's what Absalom did. And so all of a sudden I have two divided camps that there's nothing but tragedy going to come out of that. Nothing but discord and problems going to come out of that. We as parents have to speak, like I said, letting our words resound in their ears forever so that they understand that what we said is true. Even when, if David had done that, he didn't, but had he done that, those people that came to Absalom would have never tracked in. Now, I made my sons mad, I'm sure. I never gave Zach a black eye as Mom did. I almost gave Rob a black eye one day because somebody said. And I doubled my fist and went to punch him. I couldn't punch. I think I smacked him, but did I punch him?
Yeah, but it wasn't like a. It was more like
it wasn't a good punch.
No, it wasn't a. You didn't step into it.
Should I try again?
No, I'm gonna dodge you this time. I kind of deserved it though. What did I tell you?
Yeah, go
Dante,
ahead.
earmuffs. I told him to F off when I was in high school. That's why I got punched. So, okay, you can look yours now.
But you know.
Yeah, that was that stunned silence. That was what I heard after the ringing stopped in my ears.
It's a matter of training them every day. You know, I look at my child, I look at my grandchildren, and I look at the way they are as children right now, and the adults that they will be. How you speak into your children's life is important. The words we say are important. We say it all the time. But it's important to realize that God created all that we understand, all that we see today. He created it with words. Well, I wanted to create with my children. I wasn't successful at it every time. I'm honest. These boys could tell you that. Mindy could tell you that. But the thing is that I wanted to speak into their lives in such a way that they would always hear those words, you know, and they would be words of encouragement. I do remember when Rob was a little guy, was brand new. Everybody remember All in the Family? Those of you that are old enough. Now you can still watch it on friendly TV, but you know it's one of those shows that you probably need to stay away from. But the thing is that his loving patronage of his son-in-law was, he never called him, I don't remember what the kid, He always called him Meathead, but that wasn't his name. But he always called him Meathead. So when Rob was a little guy, I called him Meathead. Well,
now I have a big head. Thanks a lot.
But those are not the words you want ringing in their ears, you know. And so you try to encourage them. You say the right things to them. You speak to them in such a way of encouragement that even when they're struggling with something, that they can get through because they know Dad is on their side. They know Dad is their biggest fan, you know, and that's important, you know, or Mom. And we don't leave out moms here. Moms' voices are just as important, just as strong. But we have to speak words of encouragement. You know, there's power in our words. There's power in what we say. And when we do that, you know, with his words, Jesus spoke to healing. Jesus spoke to all the things that needed to be done. He spoke to raise the dead. He healed the sick. He stilled the sea with his words. Our words are powerful. And we should want them ringing in the ears of our children all of their lives.
And you guys, it's important too that just like I said, that with David, he was pulled in many different directions as a father. For one thing, David had 8 wives. We talk a lot about Solomon and his wives. David had 8 wives.
That's crazy.
That's being pulled in lots of directions. I have 1 wife, and I get pulled in directions. I can't imagine having 8 wives. One of them, his first wife, had gone and married someone else, and he had to go back and take her by force. See, Michael. That's what you get when you marry a girl with a guy's name. So you have problems. That's what happens. But he had 8 wives. In fact, Absalom was born to his 4th wife, who was Maacah, and then all the way down to Bathsheba, who would give birth to his heirs. So David had 8 wives. Now, ladies, when you have a child, Is your child more important to you than another woman's child, or less important to you than another woman's child? It's yours, right? Obviously. Absolutely. You're going to care more about your child than somebody else. Now imagine having the ear of the king and how they would have pleaded the case for each one of their children above the other. David had lots of kids. You have 8 wives, you end up with lots of kids. You're a king. You don't have to work hard for a living. You have lots of free time.
Not with 8 wives, you don't.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You have lots of time to take care of things with those 8 wives.
Oh, okay.
So David had lots of kids. And so those wives are all preaching, or not preaching, but speaking up for their kids. Now David's pulled in all these different directions. And so I'm not denying that David loved his kids, but I'm denying is he didn't give them a structure that was important for them to be able to grow. Absalom had everybody always talks about him as having a rebellious spirit. That's what you hear. The old commentaries will say, that Absalom had a rebellious spirit because he rebelled against his father. His father gave him no frame of reference for how to act. His father had 8 wives that split his time. His father didn't impose justice when it was needed. His father pushed him away and then embarrassed him in front of the people of the nation. And then when it comes around to it, his father just stood by and let him take the people away from him. Absalom had grown. Now, I'm not taking all the blame off of Absalom. He was wrong in what he did. But as a father, a lot of times it's important for us to put a very firm path in front of our children. Because if you let your kids run wild, they're going to run wherever they want. And David let Absalom go every direction he wanted to go and never directed him, never put the stop to it. He could 40 years. He had to know what Absalom was doing in the gates of the city. There's no way he didn't. Those people loved David. There had to be people come and say, hey, I saw Absalom out in the gates of the city. He's deciding these cases on his own at the gates before they ever get to the king. And David just let it happen. I know it's all of us have had kids, it's hard sometimes when you got to discipline your kids. Right, Dante? It's hard when I have to discipline Dante or Joey or any of them. But if I don't try to provide some kind of framework for my kids to live, it doesn't matter what kind of emotion of love I feel toward them. That's an emotion without action. And it won't be enough. It won't be enough as a parent, as a father, to just love your kids. You have to mold them and raise them up in the way they're supposed to go. As for what the Bible says, to give them a framework for them. He had a personality, probably a lot like mine, where he was probably hard-headed. In the wrong environment, I could have grown up to be a super rebellious kid, just like Zach. What's funny is as a parent, I guess parents change over time. I'm going to tell you a little story. I told you a story about how I was scared, but let me tell you a little story too about how parenting can sometimes change over time. When I grew up, when I was a kid, anything but Christian music was not allowed, period, ever. It wasn't in the house. I had enlisted in the Army on delayed entry. I had already signed on the bottom line to go to basic training the summer before my senior year. So I knew a year before I graduated that I was going into the service. In that time, at some point during my senior year, having already enlisted in the Army, I made the huge moral sin, the grave terror of ordering CDs from Columbia House Music Club. I still haven't paid for them.
That's why Columbia doesn't have business anymore.
Columbia House and BMG I took them both. I was making up names and addresses at one point. But those of you who are old enough to remember will understand why that's funny. But I had gotten CDs. It was Guns N' Roses, Ozzy Osbourne, Metallica, stuff like that. And I was already on my way to the Army and had a huge knock-down, drag-out fight with my parents over the fact that I brought that music in here. You're not supposed to be listening to that kind of music. We raised you better than that. I go to basic training. I come home in December.
What happened to those CDs?
I don't know.
I broke them in front of you.
A couple of them, yeah.
And then he said, those weren't mine. See, he even lied.
I came home for Christmas. I left to basic training right after I graduated. My senior year. So I went through my senior year. I survived that, I brought the shame upon House Martin of having Ozzy Osbourne in the house. And So I graduated, went to basic training, came home for Christmas that December to watch Zach open a present from my parents, which was a Pearl Jam CD, the album 10 from Pearl Jam. And that fast, it had changed. Not only was it allowed, they were buying it for him. So that's how quick parenting can change.
It's not parenting, it's the children.
So I guess I'll leave to you to decide which one of us he loved most. I got two people going once. What was that, Hank?
Yeah.
Zach was always a little bit smarter than me. See, I was more stubborn. My personality is if I'm going to do something, I'm just going to do it, and you're going to deal with it. And so I would do it, knowing full well I wasn't supposed to, and then, have the nerve to act like I was surprised when I got punished. But I just I'm like, if you're going to punish me, if I'm going to do it, and I'm going to get caught, I'm going to earn whatever punishment I get. Okay, so you're going to punish me, it's not going to stop me. I'm going to do it again. But Zach was a little bit different, so Zach got sneaky. So Zach had a whole different vibe. But one time when Zach was little, well, I'll let you tell the story.
We were living in Morton on 4th Street, and Zach had gotten in trouble. He was only in like 2nd grade. And I sent him up to his room because I quit using my belt to spank. I said, you go get your belt. He's gone forever, and I'm getting madder by the moment. This boy gets back down here, I'm going to use my belt this time. Corporal punishment, I believed in it. Okay, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, you did.
Him, it was capital punishment. It was normally corporal.
It felt like capital.
So Zach comes down. He's got tears streaming down his cheeks, holding his little belt out like this. I think it wasn't that, but that long, And he's holding it out. He hands it to me, and he turns around. And the head of the teddy bear is sticking out of the back of his pants. At that point, I said, "You're grounded. Go to your room." And I lost it. I was laughing so hard. I don't think he ever got punished for what he got punished for. The thing is that we want their personalities to grow. We want them to become who they can be. And I believe part of maybe David, David, think about David. David was the last of the children in his father. And his dad had sort of discarded him, really. When the prophet came and said, I'm going to anoint the king, and he lined up all the boys, where's David? He's out in the field shepherding the sheep. Well, David comes in, he gets anointed king. But David was always, I took David's personality was always this kind person, always thinking about the others. It's like he didn't harm Saul when he could have. But see, he didn't expect, I don't think he expected what came out of Absalom. But he handled Absalom the same way he had handled everything else in life. He just sort of, if I just sort of push it off, it'll go away. If I just go to, and I think that was a mistake he made. But it's like, I know in my case, I was the good son. I was the perfect. Ask my mom. I was the perfect guy, and I expected that automatically be in my sons and my daughter.
So which one of us was the perfect child?
Mindy. The thing is that we want to instill in them as much as we possibly can the right things, and we do that through our words. We don't do that through discipline. We don't do that through corporal punishment or capital punishment in Rob's case. We don't do it like that. We do it by speaking the right things into their lives. We do it by saying the right things every time they misbehave or they're in good behavior. That we say the right things. Deb and and I have to tell you, I didn't learn that right away. I didn't learn that right away with my kids. I guess that was what the letters were about. But I have learned that with my grandchildren. First off, all my grandchildren are the best. If I'd had them first, we wouldn't have had to worry about having our own kids. They were just their grandkids are so great. But I look at all of them. First off, the oldest 5 are all honor students. They all had all opportunities to go to college on scholarships and things like that. The first 5 of them, and it's like if the next ones trail after that, like that, and Dante will be like that. I know Leah's already in honors. The thing is I speak to them about the possibilities. I speak to them through words because I want them to come up in the next generation to be stronger than their parents. I want their parents' ceiling to be my grandchildren's floors. Just like I wanted my children to be the floor above me. I wanted them to grow. And I know that's true of all of us as parents. And when we make mistakes as parenting, we need to own up to it. David didn't.
And I'm not trying to rip too much on David. The Bible does it very clear that David was a man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
In that he loved his children and he loved the same way God loved, I think, which is what
Yes.
makes him more like God's own heart. He had a great capacity for love. And sometimes, though, it's time to remember, I don't like the phrase tough love gets misused sometimes, but a structured love would have helped in Absalom's case especially. And we don't hear anything about his other kids either. Except for the other one, Ahinadab, also rose up against him. So David's house was full of strife. And I believe it was because that while he did love, he never really got the right way to focus and direct bringing up his kids in love. Because it's enough that there's a lot of parents out there that love their kids, and they love them right as they walk into oppression. They love them right as they walk into terror. They love them right as they walk into drugs. They love them right as they walk into living crazy. They love them the whole time, but don't love enough to stop them. They don't know how to. And I'm not trying to, like I said, I'm not trying to rip on David, but I looked at Absalom completely different this time as I was preparing this, because like I said, I've always been raised to think that it was Absalom who was the problem. Absalom was a problem. He was a responsible adult. He was in his 50s, 60s by the time he died at the hand of David's general. But at the same time, David made so many mistakes along the way that he allowed Absalom to be lost. And we see, if you look around, there are parents everywhere, every day, right now, mourning children they've lost and loved them the whole time. And I think it's very important on Father's Day, especially, to remember that the biggest crisis hitting our country right now isn't drugs. It isn't the left wing or the right wing. It isn't guns. It isn't violence. It isn't any of these other things. It's an absence of fatherhood.
Yeah.
It is an absence of fathers that not only love their kids, but love them enough for their neighbors to think they're bad people for punishing them. They love them enough that they're not afraid that the teacher's going to look at them sideways because they punished them. Because it's not about hating your kids. The Bible says very clear, if you hate the child, then you're going to spoil it. And spoil not by giving them what they want, by spoiling, but by letting them rot on the vine. Fruit can rot while it's being fed the whole time. Fruit can rot on the vine. And so you can love your kids and love your kids, you love your kids and bury them at the same time. And I don't want that. I don't think anybody here would want that. Anybody who has kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, friends with kids would not want to see that happen. It's important for fathers to finally, once again, and take their place and not be afraid what the media is going to say about a father who asserts himself in his household. You can't be afraid of that, men, dads, uncles, grandfathers, friends, neighbors. You can't be afraid of supporting a system that requires men to stand up and do what they need to do.
And us women need to support them for that. Instead of pulling them apart, we need to get behind them.
Thank you. That's right. The African phrase, it takes a village, it really just takes two parents to raise up children right. It takes two parents side by side. When Deb and I got married, that was one of the main conversations we had when she was pregnant with Rob in Texas. It was, how are we going to raise our children? We'd see other kids and so they're not going to do that, they're not going to do that. But we said, this is a standard we want to set for our kids. And we never wavered much, but the main standard that we set is that our children will never see us in disagreement over them. They'll never see us where one of them can come and say, I know the kids would come to me and ask for something. I was normally a no. I wanted more information is what I was after, but they'd go to mom and say, well, mom, what'd your dad say? He said no. Well, dad said no. Well, I'm sure they still to this day think that they talked to me and they went back to me, but by the time they got back to me, mom came to me and said, why'd you say no? And if I didn't have a good reason, then I better rethink it. But they never saw that. So they came back and they won dad's approval. In reality, mom had already stepped in and said, that was not a good reason. We made a decision to have good reasons for telling them no, we're not letting them do things. And we never allowed them, I don't believe they ever saw us in disagreement over something like that in front of them. That didn't mean we didn't disagree. But we took a stand, as just as Kim said, and we decided to stand together. And a lot of time that didn't happen. It doesn't happen in homes today. It doesn't happen in homes, hasn't happened in homes for years. But Deb and I both believe strongly that it took both of us to raise them the correct way, and we had to be a united front in doing that.
And that's important too, because like I said, I want to make sure it's clear, I'm not a tyrant. I don't think you should be a tyrant. I'm probably more lenient in our house than Crystal is. I probably let them get away with a little bit more than she does. So sometimes she's like, hey, you need to stop them from doing that. I'm like, all right. They need to stop that. So a lot of times she's a little bit stricter than I am. That's because I grew up under a steel curtain. And so, so I tended to sway a little bit further the other way. You know, it was like living in communist Russia. Nothing got passed.
Your brother wouldn't agree with that.
Well, he lived a different life. He knew different people. So I did bring a lot of it on myself. Zach probably had all those CDs before he opened them up on Christmas morning. He had them the whole time I did. I put mine out there in full view so you can see them. Like, look what I did. And, but again, with David, I don't want to rip on David too much. Love was never the question. So that's what always struck me as being, I'm not trying to get...
You're fine.
Past your conclusion or not.
No.
Well, because I always before, and I've heard, there was a joke, and many of you may not know this, but my dad, when I was young, and he would get asked to go preach somewhere, we'd go somewhere to preach, this was a sermon, it was a young man safe. It was one he had in his back pocket, that was ready to go, and in a moment's notice.
You know, I couldn't find that sermon for this week.
Really?
I've looked all over, I can't find it anywhere.
Oh, well, it's been retired then. It's kind of like me with the I'm Gorgeous sermon. I can preach that anywhere I go at the drop of a hat. That is the young man safe sermon. And so, growing up, you hear David mourning the loss, the death of, is a young man safe? Is a young man safe? And it's so sad because you think it's just sad because Absalom's dead and he's worried about Absalom. I think it's even more heartbreaking when you realize that he knows at this point there's no chance to fix it. That's the part I think that bothers him the most when he's mourning Absalom. Is the young man safe? Because he doesn't want Absalom to come to the end that he knew was coming his way because of where he let Absalom get. And this makes it so much more heartbreaking is that it wasn't just that he was losing a son. He realized, I think, in that moment where he had gone wrong, what had happened, and what the chain of events that were going on at that point. David could have stopped at any time. Absalom was at war with his own father. And David could have a long time ago changed the course of that relationship and that direction that Absalom was in. And I think he wanted one more chance to make it right. And that's what really floored him.
I'm going to tag in on that. There comes points in your children's lives where you're considering what could happen to them. And usually it comes about the teenage years. Because now they're a little bit more free. We gave Rob freedom. He was our oldest, so it was sort of tense when the first time he gets behind the wheel and drives a car, because you know what can happen with cars. And I'm reminded of a lady that I know that just recently lost a daughter in a car accident, and it's not that in any way she holds up to a lot of what he just said, but when you put them in that position to where you want them to hear all the safe words that you say. Be careful who you're in the car with. Be careful what you're doing this, doing that. And I know that I felt that way when Rob left for the Army. They pulled away, and Zach and Jenny are feeling that right now. They pulled away from our house. He was in the recruiter's car. I think they picked him up at the house. And as they drove up the street, I watched him the whole way up the street. And I'm thinking, I'm not there anymore for him. I think the thing actually I told him when we went and had a talk in the parking lot in Sunnyland is all your life I've been able to come in, step in, protect you, do this, do that. And I said that day's gone. Now it's dependent upon your decision. And their decisions, beloved, are based on what we've taught them. Absalom didn't get that teaching. Absalom didn't receive that kind of encouragement from David. I'm not picking on David either. I'm not picking on either one. I never have picked on either one of them, because as a father, I knew David's heart as he's saying, is the young man safe? Because when Rob left, when Zach left, when Mindy, all of them left the house, my concern was, are they okay? When your kids are littler and you can step in and you can block them, you can protect them, that's a whole different story. But when they step out into their own world, is the young man safe? Is the young lady safe? David hadn't spent enough time with his children, I believe, to really instill in them the love that he had for them, but also, like Rob said, the discipline. Because it does take both parts. It does take you feeling like you're a tyrant, communist Russia or whatever, for that moment. But I think the boys would agree with this, that what I always did after I punished them, that I would always bring them up, say, set them on my lap. Well, not when Rob got on to put him on my lap. You break your leg. But the thing is I didn't mean now. I don't mean now. He sat on my lap now. And there it is. The thing is that I always brought him up and I say, hey, I love you.
He had to pick us up because legs were broken and blood was gushing. He had to clean up the scene before the cops got there.
You want to partake in God's name. How does God respond to us as a father? He talks about our success. He talks about the plans that he has for us. He told Jeremiah, I have plans for you. I've had them since you were in the womb. He talks about his love for us. He sent his son to die on a cross for us that we could be in heaven with him, or not heaven, but in eternity with him. He talked about the power that he invested in us. He delegated in us a power. God responds to us with health. He says, I'm going to provide you that. By Jesus' stripes, you are healed. He talked to us about his word, how his word was important for our lifespan. And those are the things that we have to do with our children, from when they're young all the way till now. I still try to, I have it's a different reference point now with me and my children because of the ages they are. They're grown adults. I can remember when I was that age. I can remember when my dad was my age. I thought, man, he's old. I'm not old anymore, I'm not old. 50s, 70 is the new 50. So I'm the same age as Rob.
At this point, I don't know what's what anymore. I know 50's coming. It's not going to stop. I'm not looking forward to it. I know we're not supposed to speak negative or anything, but yeah, 50 doesn't sound good. I don't like the sound of 50.
I like 50. Yeah, 50 is good.
I don't know. Yeah.
And then 69 feel fine, right? That's right. 70 what? Heavenly. Yeah, 70's heavenly. Is that right, Rob? 70's heavenly. He's only 49. He's what? That's my favorite year coming. Because 72 was the year that changed my life. So 72 is going to change my life. Jesus will be back when I'm 72. So anyway, it's important for us not only on Father's Day, but in every day to remind ourselves as parents, not just fathers, but mothers also, to remind ourselves as parents, as grandparents, of how we need to speak into the lives of those that we're raising up. And you know what? That doesn't stop because they're 50 and 45 and all that.
I'm not 50 yet.
Oh, you're
okay?
not 50. Okay.
I'm 48.
Oh, you're 48.
Yes.
That's right.
I've been alive 49 years, but technically, they say I'm 48.
So in December,
that was for Crystal, who's listening in the nursery right now, who just got mad at me.
Yeah. So, but not this December, but next December you'll be 50, because you'll be alive 50 years then, right?
I'll celebrate the 50th anniversary of my birth in a year and a half.
At any rate, he's old. And so it doesn't change my response to him or to Zach or to Mindy or to my daughter-in-laws, my son-in-law. My response to them is still to speak encouragement, to speak love, and if need to, guidance. Because I'm at an age where I have a lot of wisdom.
You do appear very wisdomous.
You got to close for this? No, go ahead.
I expected you to close. But in closing, the important thing, too, is to remember that in a way that David was a man after God's own heart, was the amount of love. But God's ways were not always our ways, and he didn't measure up to God. But it's also important, too, that just because you may have made a mistake, or because you see someone who's drifted the wrong way, or because you haven't always lived up to the own ideals that you have for yourself, your own expectations for your own life, we're joking about age, don't let that stop you from making a change. If David had stepped in at year 20 of Absalom sitting at the gates, it probably would have been really easy for him to say, well, it's been 20 years, what am I supposed to do now? If he had stepped in at 20 years, things could have been different. If he had stepped in at 39 years, things could have been different. We don't know. Never give up, and never be afraid to forgive yourself to the point where you'll go back and try to make right the places where you've been wrong. We're so hard on, we see all of our mistakes, and they play on a loop a lot of times in the back of our head, and a little jerk that runs the projector in your brain that shows you all these scenes. Sometimes he gets an attitude and just brings stuff up out of nowhere. I'll be randomly driving along and remember something stupid I did 30 years ago. And I'm like, well, where did that come from? And somebody that's in there. And that little guy that runs a projector, sometimes you need to smack him around and tell him to turn it off and try to forget about the things you've done, because our own faults, our own weaknesses, our own shortcomings, our own misgivings, our own insecurities, our own deficiencies will oftentimes will trap us into a place where we won't change something that we can. We won't change things that we're able to because we feel like we don't have a right to because of things we've done wrong before. If we're going to believe that God can forgive anybody of anything and welcome into the kingdom and change them and renew them and give their lives purpose, we have to believe the same about us. So now, I've not been a perfect father. I've not. And I don't think that, Joey especially, he's seen me for longer, would argue that I was perfect. But I always want to be able to try to make amends for things I've done wrong, or I want to be able to have a chance to still correct course no matter how far along I've been. Because like I said, Absalom plotted against David for 40 years. Who knows if on the year 39 David would have gone out and tried to make it right, what things could have been different. Maybe he wouldn't have been mourning Absalom. Maybe he would have been rejoicing for his return. He would have been rejoicing. They could have repaired things. But he didn't, and we have what we saw happen, which was Absalom dying and David in deep mourning and deep sorrow. And if you don't want that, then you've got to make sure that the first thing you do is you ask for God's forgiveness. He'll give it to you unconditionally. And then you have to forgive yourself. Remember, stop what you're doing.
There's a better way.
There is a better way.
Parenting's forever. Once you become a parent, it's forever. It doesn't stop because they're older. And enjoy Father's Day, guys. Happy Father's Day to you all. Be blessed.